The bright lights of the National Policy Forum studio cast sharp shadows across the faces of two women seated opposite one another. Pam Bondi, Florida's former Attorney General and a fierce conservative advocate, sat with impeccable posture in a tailored red blazer. Across from her, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas's 30th District, leaned forward slightly, her calm but determined expression betraying the intensity of the moment. For 20 minutes, the segment had been billed as a debate on voting rights, but it had spiraled into a heated clash. Veteran journalist Robert Donovan, the moderator, was struggling to rein in the exchange as both women fiercely defended their positions. The atmosphere was tense, electric, and then something completely unexpected happened. Crockett reached into her portfolio and unfolded a worn document. "Miss Bondi," she said firmly, sliding the paper across the table. "Before you continue, I'd like you to look at this." The camera zoomed in. The document, dated March 17, 2018, bore the official seal of the Florida Attorney General's office. Bondi's confident expression faltered, shifting quickly to confusion. She began to read. The studio fell silent. One production assistant would later remark, "You could have heard a pin drop." Every eye was locked on Bondi's face as her confidence drained into shock. For nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in live television, Bondi said nothing. Then she looked up, blinking rapidly. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, was noticeably softer. "Congresswoman Crockett, I've never seen this report before. If what you're showing me is accurate—" She hesitated, visibly wrestling with the words. "Then I need to reconsider my position." The control room erupted in whispers. This kind of concession, especially from two ideological opposites, never happened on political television. But the true shock came next. Bondi reached up, removed her earpiece, cutting the direct line to her advisors, and placed it on the table. She leaned forward and said the 7 words that would replay endlessly on cable news, late-night comedy shows, and social media for weeks. "Let's have a real conversation about this." When the show returned from an unscheduled commercial break, millions of viewers saw something unprecedented. Two political opponents setting aside the script to engage in authentic dialogue. A moment that would transform the debate over voting rights and reshape public expectations for how political disagreements could be addressed on American television. Before we reveal what was in that document and why it shook the foundation of this conversation, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Our channel is dedicated to spotlighting the pivotal moments in American politics that mainstream coverage often overlooks. Moments that prove democracy is about more than endless conflict. Do televised political debates actually help voters understand complicated issues? Or do they just deepen the divisions we already have? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear how these kinds of programs shape your own understanding of political issues. As the broadcast continued, the exchange between Pam Bondi and Jasmine Crockett grew sharper. Bondi pointed to examples of voter irregularities from the 2020 election, while Crockett pushed back, questioning whether those cases really applied. When Crockett raised the problem of reduced polling places in certain communities, Bondi challenged her facts. Viewers watching at home, and many already posting on social media, noticed something unusual. Despite disagreeing strongly, both women sounded informed and prepared. Instead of just repeating talking points, they were actually addressing one another's arguments. Around the 20-minute mark, moderator Robert Donovan tried to steer the conversation toward proposed federal legislation. He asked Crockett about the Freedom to Vote Act, which would standardize voting procedures across the country, and reminded her that Bondi had raised concerns about federal overreach. Crockett began defending the need for national voting protections. But then she paused. The look on her face signaled that she had decided to take a different direction, one that would completely change the course of the program. "You know what, Robert? I think we're missing something important here," Crockett said, pulling a folder from her portfolio. She turned to Bondi. "Before you go on, I want you to look at this." She slid a folded document across the table. The camera zoomed in as Crockett explained calmly, "This came from your office, dated March 17, 2018. In an instant, the tone shifted. The on-screen captions still read "Partisan Showdown," voting rights debate, but what was happening on set was no longer the usual back and forth. Bondi's confident expression turned cautious as she glanced down at the paper. "What exactly am I looking at, Congresswoman?" she asked. Her voice steady but edged with uncertainty, Crockett explained. It was an internal analysis from the Florida Attorney General's office while Bondi was in charge. The report detailed real-world problems with the voter ID law Bondi's team had defended in court. The studio fell completely silent. As Bondi read, her face tightened with concern. Crockett pointed to one section, explaining it showed about 27,000 registered voters, many elderly, rural or low-income, would face major hurdles obtaining the proper identification. She then highlighted a case study of a 78-year-old veteran in Pensacola who had made 3 unsuccessful trips trying to secure valid ID. The cameras caught Bondi blinking rapidly as she flipped to the second page. This wasn't staged. Her reaction was genuine. After nearly half a minute of silence, a lifetime in live television, Bondi finally looked up. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said in a softer tone, "I've never seen this report. If what you're showing me is true—" She stopped, clearly wrestling with her words. "Then I need to reconsider my position." Inside the control room, producers scrambled, whispering frantically. Nothing like this ever happened on political TV. In Donovan's earpiece, the director urged, "Stay with this. Don't interrupt." Then Bondi made a move no one expected. She calmly removed her earpiece, cutting off her advisors, placed it on the desk, and said 7 simple words. "Let's have a real conversation about this." Donovan, understanding the historic nature of what was unfolding, leaned forward and said, "We'll be right back after a short break." When the program resumed, the atmosphere was completely different. The usual tension was gone. What viewers saw instead was something almost unheard of in modern political television. 2 smart women from opposite sides actually listening to one another. Bondi spoke first. "I want to be clear. Election integrity means a great deal to me. But every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot without facing unnecessary hurdles. If this document is accurate, and I have no reason to think it isn't, then we identified real problems that were never fixed." Crockett nodded firmly. "That's exactly why I wanted you to see it. Because I believe you when you say you care about every eligible voter being able to participate." Bondi looked down at the report again, shaking her head slightly. "What I don't understand," she admitted, "is why this never reached my desk. A study like this should have guided the policies we pushed forward. That's really the bigger point I've been trying to raise," Crockett said. "In debates like these, we're often working from completely different sets of facts. You and I may both agree that eligible voters deserve fair access while still protecting election security. But we're relying on different data about what's actually happening. For the next 15 minutes, viewers witness something almost unheard of on political television, a real, substantive exchange. Instead of trading accusations, Crockett and Bondi examined specific examples of how voting laws play out in practice. They talked about times when voters had been wrongly turned away, and also about instances when fraud prevention procedures had successfully caught irregularities. "My concern isn't with voter verification itself," Crockett explained. "It's with how those rules are applied in ways that create unequal burdens. In Houston, for example, our monitoring showed average wait times of 23 minutes in majority-white neighborhoods, compared to over 100 minutes in Black and Latino communities. Instead of brushing the point aside, Bondi acknowledged it. Implementation matters, she admitted. If certain communities are shouldering heavier burdens, that's a problem no matter the intent. But I also think we need standardized procedures nationwide so voters and election officials both have clarity." As the discussion unfolded, both women began identifying areas where they surprisingly agreed. They both supported expanding early voting. They both endorsed modernizing registration systems with built-in security checks. They both worried about partisan poll watchers intimidating voters at precincts. Then Bondi shared something personal. "My father is 87 years old and has voted in every election since 1956, in 2020. He nearly couldn't vote because of ID confusion. He had his military ID, which should have been valid, but a poll worker insisted on a driver's license, which he no longer has since he stopped driving. It took another worker stepping in to fix it, Crockett leaned in. And that's exactly the kind of real-world breakdown we're talking about. The law allowed his military ID, but on the ground, the training and enforcement weren't consistent. Moderator Robert Donovan, understanding how extraordinary the moment was, mostly stepped aside. He only chimed in with clarifying questions while letting the dialogue flow naturally. The true turning point came when Bondi asked something unexpected. Congresswoman, if you had the chance to design a system that both guarantees every eligible voter can cast a ballot easily while also maintaining strong verification standards, what would it look like? It wasn't a challenge, it was an invitation to problem solve. Crockett responded with a detailed plan: automatic registration using secure government databases, multiple forms of ID verification, expanded early voting with standardized hours across states, and updated voting equipment with paper backups. Bondi didn't sign off on every detail, but she didn't dismiss it either. Automatic registration makes sense if the databases are reliable and citizenship is verified. I'd also want regular audits to ensure accuracy. What? Emerged wasn't perfect consensus, but something far more valuable, a roadmap, built on shared principles instead of partisan. Soundbites. As the program neared its final segment, the control room was buzzing. Producers cut other planned content to extend this extraordinary exchange. Camera operators were instructed to capture every reaction. Meanwhile, social media was lighting up, with viewers posting in disbelief at seeing two political figures actually listen to each other. Finally, Donovan rejoined the conversation. We have about 10 minutes left. I'd like our viewers to understand just how significant this is, Miss Bondi. You came in today with firm positions on voting rules. Has this discussion shifted your perspective in any way? Bondi, whose career was built on strong conservative advocacy, did something rare for political television. She admitted her views were evolving. Yes, Robert, it has, she said with sincerity. I still believe election integrity is critical. But Congresswoman Crockett has helped me see gaps in implementation that I hadn't fully appreciated. When veterans like my father or other eligible citizens face needless barriers, that's not defending democracy, that's undermining it. She held up the internal report Crockett had introduced earlier. This shows we identified issues but didn't fix them. That's a failure I have to own. And it makes me wonder what other blind spots exist in the policies I've supported. Donovan then turned to Crockett. And Congresswoman, has anything in Ms. Bondi's perspective influenced your own thinking today? Crockett nodded thoughtfully. Absolutely. I've been so focused on removing barriers that I haven't always acknowledged. Valid concerns about verification, Ms. Bondi's emphasis on building systems that ensure both accessibility and security makes perfect sense. We shouldn't have to choose between those values. The cameras caught Bondi surprised, but genuine smile at Crockett's admission, another authentic moment in a broadcast full of them. What I value most about this exchange, Crockett said, is that we've moved past broad principles and into the details of how voting laws actually work in practice. That's where solutions can be found, moderator Robert Donovan, fully aware that the cameras were capturing something historic, voiced the question viewers at home were already asking: where do we go from here? Is this just an unusual TV moment, or could this conversation lead to real collaboration? The two women exchanged a thoughtful glance. Bondi spoke first. I think there's genuine potential to find common ground on specific reforms, not total agreement, because we still have different priorities, but enough to make meaningful progress. Turning directly to Crockett, she added, Congresswoman, would you be open to working together on best practices for voter ID laws in states that already have them? Not debating whether the laws should exist, but ensuring they're implemented without creating unfair burdens. It was not a vague nod to bipartisanship. It was a concrete offer. Crockett looked taken aback for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I would. And I'd add that we should expand the discussion to best practices for early voting systems and poll worker training. If we can establish standards that both protect access and safeguard security, that would be a real step forward, Bondi agreed. I think that's possible. At the end of the day, we both want elections where every eligible voter can participate and where results reflect the will of the people. Our differences are in the methods, not the ultimate goal, as they continued. Viewers saw something extraordinary, two politicians, from opposite sides genuinely seeking common ground without surrendering. Their core beliefs, the conversation reached its most powerful point when Donovan asked why this moment felt so different from the political debates Americans usually see. Crockett answered first, because we stopped performing for our audiences and started listening. When Ms. Bondi engaged with the real challenges of implementation instead of dismissing them, the tone completely changed. Bondi nodded. And when Congresswoman Crockett acknowledged that security concerns aren't all just voter suppression, it opened space for real discussion. Honestly, I think taking out my earpiece helped too. Sometimes our teams lock us into fight mode when we might otherwise find common ground. As the segment neared its end, Donovan asked one last question. Could this kind of exchange become more common in our politics, or is this just a rare exception? The pause before their answers said everything. Bondi finally spoke. I think it's possible, but it requires something that's become rare, a willingness to be persuaded publicly by new evidence. Too often we're so focused on winning the argument that we forget the point of having the argument, Crockett agreed. It also requires spaces where true conversation can happen. Most political media is designed for conflict, not for solutions. Fierce disagreements bring ratings, but they don't bring answers. What people really want is exactly this, an honest discussion of complex issues. The real world isn't simple, and Americans deserve better than the stage theater we usually give them. Donovan wrapped up by thanking both women for one of the most remarkable political conversations I've witnessed in 30 years of journalism. The cameras lingered on Bondi and Crockett shaking hands. It wasn't the forced handshake of political rivals, but the genuine gesture of mutual respect. What no one realized at that moment was just how much this single exchange would reshape expectations for political dialogue in the weeks ahead. By the time Bondi and Crockett left the National Policy Forum studio, clips of their conversation were spreading like wildfire online. What started as a trending hashtag quickly became a cultural event, with millions calling it the conversation America needed. News outlets scrambled to frame the moment. Some tried to declare winners and losers, missing the bigger shift. Others speculated it'd been staged, but insiders confirmed both women were as surprised as the audience by how the dialogue unfolded. Within 24 hours, the full segment had been viewed over 12 million times across platforms. The hashtag Real Conversation dominated social media as Americans voiced frustration, with typical political theater and excitement about seeing something authentic. Major newspapers and magazines ran headlines like, "When Political Opponents Actually Listen, the Bondi-Crockett Moment," and "Could One Broadcast Change the Way We Talk About Voting Rights?" Media critics were equally struck. One wrote, "For the first time in modern political television, two leaders weren't performing. They were thinking aloud. In real time." Then 3 days later, Bondi and Crockett stunned observers again. In a joint announcement, they revealed they would co-chair a bipartisan working group dedicated to improving how voting systems are implemented. The group would bring together election officials from both parties, security experts, and voting rights advocates. Their mission statement was clear. Our goal isn't to argue abstract principles, but to solve the real, practical problems voters face. How do we make sure voter ID rules don't create unnecessary burdens? How do we keep voter rolls accurate without pushing eligible citizens out of the system? How do we train poll workers so procedures are applied fairly everywhere? Crockett asked. These are real, practical challenges that go beyond party politics. What made this collaboration stand out was that neither woman abandoned her core beliefs. In later appearances, Bondi continued stressing the importance of election security, while Crockett stayed committed to expanding access. But both began addressing each other's concerns with greater nuance, acknowledging the validity of issues they once might have dismissed outright, the ripple effect went far beyond the two of them. Other political programs started testing new formats that encouraged deeper exchanges. Some extended debate segments without commercial interruptions. Others rewarded guests for directly answering opposing arguments rather than pivoting back to talking points. To the surprise of many producers, audiences responded positively. We've learned that respect and substance can actually boost engagement if it's presented the right way. One executive explained. The biggest breakthrough came 6 months later, when the bipartisan working group, led by Bondi and Crockett, released its recommendations for improving voting systems. Instead of abstract positions, the report offered concrete solutions, guidance on ID requirements, standards for early voting, and improved training for poll workers. We didn't try to settle every disagreement about voting policy, Crockett said while unveiling the report. We focused on making sure that whatever policies states choose, they're applied in ways that don't block eligible voters while still protecting election integrity, Bondi added. This isn't about whether states should have certain laws, it's about making sure that when they do, implementation doesn't undermine the right to vote. That's a goal Americans across the spectrum can agree on. The recommendations won support from groups on both the left and the right. Several states even began adopting pieces of the framework. But perhaps the bigger impact was symbolic, showing that it was possible to engage with hot-button issues without reducing them to a shouting match. 1 year later, Bondi and Crockett reunited on the National Policy Forum to reflect on their journey. Asked what they had learned personally, both gave answers that went beyond politics. I've realized that acknowledging complexity and hearing different perspectives doesn't weaken your principles, Bondi said. It actually strengthens your advocacy because you're addressing real concerns instead of pretending they don't exist, Crockett agreed. And I've learned that progress rarely comes from one side winning everything. It comes from finding places where competing values can work side by side. When Donovan asked whether they regretted anything about their now famous exchange, Crockett shook her head. Only that it took a televised debate to make it happen. Conversations like this should be happening all the time in our democracy. The fact that it was so unusual shows how far we've drifted from meaningful dialogue. Bondi smiled. My only regret is not taking out my earpiece sooner. Sometimes the best political moments happen when we stop following the script and start engaging as citizens. Of course, their dialogue didn't solve every dispute. Big divides remained over federal versus state authority, verification standards, and funding. But what they proved was that progress becomes possible when leaders stop talking past each other and start engaging honestly. For millions of Americans tired of partisan theater, the Bondi-Crockett exchange was a hopeful reminder that our discourse isn't broken, it's just badly structured. The real legacy wasn't a specific policy, but a change in expectations. Viewers began demanding the same authenticity from other leaders, putting subtle but real pressure on media outlets and public officials alike. As one commentator summed it up, Bondi and Crockett showed what can happen when political opponents truly listen. They didn't agree on everything, but they proved that the path forward in a divided democracy begins with engagement, not performance. In a media world dominated by loud voices and endless conflict, their conversation became a symbol of possibility, proof that Americans still hunger for substance over spectacle. If this story of real political dialogue inspired you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Our channel highlights the rare but powerful moments when leaders cut through the noise and have genuine, solution-focused conversations. Share this video with friends and family who might be losing hope that our divisions can be bridged. And tell us in the comments, what political issues would you like to see explored in this kind of honest, constructive format?